the other thing is just that I'd been holding out hope that someone out there would find the mysterious, like, full cut of the movie, the one that was rumored to exist and was shown at the premiere and then has never been seen again, that people have been like, oh, it's supposed to be actually not that bad, maybe even pretty good. Canon thought that they could chop out 45 minutes to get more screenings and make more money on this movie.
I don't believe it.
Me either.
Supposedly. It could also just be none of that. Everyone, and welcome back to the Men of Steel podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, J. Mike Folson.
Hey, everybody. We're finally doing this movie. It's finally happening.
Yes. If you actually saw the title of the episode on your podcast player, you know that a thing that we have been dreading for 100 and some episodes has finally come to pass. Today, we are talking about Superman 4. The Quest for Peace. And to do that conversation, we are joined by DJ Nik from the Happiness and Darkness podcast.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me on. I hope I will be able to somewhat soften the blow, if you will, or I guess will. I'm a glutton for punishment too. So happy to be here with you both, and really thank you so much for having me on.
Soften the blow is a good phrase here. So I think I've mentioned this on the pod before. I've never actually watched this movie fully before.
Oh.
Yeah.
I will admit I've only watched it twice. Once for my own podcast and secondly for this podcast. So there you go.
Okay.
I always caught it in sections.
Like, it has such a reputation as being the bad one. And I've seen clips. You know, I exist as a Superman fan on the internet, so I'm aware of a lot of the movie. I was familiar with the plot. But, you know, it came out kind of at the perfect time of, like, I can skip that one, right? Because, like, I was a child of the 80s. This came out in 87. Everyone was like, this is the bad one. Okay, cool. I'm just going to avoid it. And it's weird because I own it multiple times. I have the DVD set. I have the Blu-ray set. You know, I have it on Amazon. For this, I ended up just watching it on Max.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's been readily available. And the only reason I haven't watched it before, fear, I think is the best way to describe it. Fear. And I've got a lot of mixed feelings about this one. It was a long time coming. It's kind of insane that we didn't talk about at least the first 4 Superman movies in our first 100 episodes of being a Superman podcast, but we did 3 of them, and now we're finally doing this one. I completely understand what everyone's talking about when I watch this movie. I'm just going to say that much. There are things that I liked about it, and I don't want to be like super negative about the whole thing, but I do definitely understand when people say they don't like this movie. I will never question why they don't like this movie. I will fully understand that. But I am curious what your thoughts were just generally about it beforehand, and then like what your thoughts rewatching it for this episode were. J. Mike, had you seen this before? You're the one who always teases me about it.
Yeah, because I'm like, we're never ever going to talk about this, right? You're like, no, eventually we're going to get to it. And I was like, please don't. Then we did. And I had never like fully seen this all the way through. You know, the TV's on and you're doing something in the background, and then you come in like, oh, that's on. I'll come in like, nope, I'm not watching this, and I'll walk back out. Because like every time I walk in, something random will be happening on the screen. Like, say for instance, the whole Statue of Liberty chase thing, and I'm like, what is going on? Never again. But for you, Case, I did this for you. And yeah, this was a movie. This it's not quite like that the Wonder Woman spy movie that we saw.
Right. Yeah, the failed pilot from the 70s.
It wasn't like that, but this was definitely a movie. There are a lot of good intentions in this movie.
Lots of good intentions. Probably too many good intentions, frankly.
I should have known something was off when like the title scene first happened, and like some of the instruments in the orchestra were kind of like off. And I was like,
Yeah.
Something's like they were hitting some really bad notes in the intro crawl.
Yeah. We'll go through my notes from actually watching it for the first time for this, but yeah.
This is not the A-Team.
I'll just say this one. My note specifically for the opening credits was like a 1989 UPN TV show opening. Yeah. If you had told me this was the 80s Superboy opening, I would have believed you. Also, it's way too long.
Yeah, this would have been better as like a mini series.
Well, we can't say that for every movie at this point. Like, but
this one in particular.
So it certainly has that element of like cheap sci-fi shows where they're reusing the same special effect footage for everything. Obviously, when the episode art for this comes out, the central image is going to be that image of Superman flying towards the screen. It's like happens like 15 times in the movie. Like the first time I was like, oh yeah, that's that shot. I've heard about that shot. And then when like the fifth time happens and it was like maybe 20 minutes into the movie, I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot, isn't it? Aside from the issues of the movie, was there anything you took away on this watching of it that inspired you, changed your thoughts, like any big pivots from what had been sort of your general impression of it?
No.
Okay.
This needs to be like put in one of those containers where they locked up the Ark of the Covenant and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it needs to be watched over by top men and never be seen again.
Oh, come on now. But that said, like, I am now very curious. Is this worse than the shelved Batgirl movie?
We'll never know.
Could this possibly be worse than some of those, all those things that like Zaslav and all the execs right now?
Okay, maybe I'm being too harsh, but like, I really do feel this would have been better as like a
tax write-off,
a week-long mini-series show movie thing on like CBS or ABC in like the very early 90s.
We would be more forgiving, at least, of it. But on that note, Nick, what was your experience with it beforehand? And then, actually, I listened to the episode, so like back in the day. So I know it wasn't like super favorably received when you talked about it on your show. But
not at all. I mean, to piggyback off what Jmike was saying, I think this movie does start with good intentions in the sense that there are some messages when it's trying to bring through, like, of course, the fear of nuclear war, or even a criticism on certain kind of journalism and sensationalism and what have you. So those were actually cool concepts. Not to mention your director, Mr. Fury, he is actually considered one of the great directors of Canada. And he's actually considered one of the directors who put Canada on the map, directorially speaking, next to folks like Norman Jewison. So he has done some very inspirational stuff. He's actually won awards for some of his movies. So you're like, how could this possibly go wrong? It goes wrong spectacularly because as soon as you see the words canon, you know you're going to get a mediocre product. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. And I have waded through some terrible movies when it comes to Happiness and Darkness. Is this worse than Green Lantern or Spawn? Probably not. Supergirl is probably better than this, and that's still a horrible movie. But the thing with this is, it was great to see Christopher Reeve again. It was great to see Gene Hackman again. And I will say this, I am a Doctor Who fan, so I forgive really bad effects over really good story. Because to me, Doctor Who has never had great special effects, but it tells amazing stories. Because you're there for the story, you're not there for the special effects. So as I was watching this, I'm like, okay, the special effects are crap, but maybe it'll tell a great story. Not at all. There's just stuff that makes no sense whatsoever. Starting with the whole sensationalist thing, then you go into the whole nuclear disarmament thing. And there are just moments. I literally put down, I have 8 bullet points of death, as I call them, where there's stuff that literally makes 0 sense. You mentioned at the top of the movie, why the hell is Lois Lane speaking French in Metropolis to random strangers on the subway?
Yeah, I was confused about that. It makes sense once you get to the next scene. But the scene where it's happening, I was like, wait, are they in France? Because it looks like the London Tube, which I think actually it was because it was filmed. A lot of it was filmed in London. So it was like, oh, are they in Europe right now? Like, I guess could be. Like, there's no reason that they couldn't be. They're journalists like who are, travel across the country. Right. And apparently that's a big plot point for Lois, like doing all these trips anyway. But yeah, they just sort of set that one up and just sort of play it as if it's not weird just to randomly start speaking a different language to a stranger than what is expected to be spoken in the area you're at. It was a strange moment there.
Yeah, I mean, like if I'm on the subway over here in Italy and somebody starts speaking random German to me, I'm like, huh? I mean, the same reaction that this guy had, this random dude. I mean, this lady comes up to you, starts speaking some other language, and like, what the hell are you doing? You're not even in Paris. I mean, I get she's practicing for her trip to Paris, but couldn't she have done that with somebody that she actually knew? Like Clark, for example, saying, Clark, let's sit down and practice my French or something like that. And how can you cut Superman's hair with just shears?
Yeah, I have some weird thoughts about that. Like, because they make a whole point about how much weight it can hold. And then the only thing I can figure what they're supposed to be doing with the bolt cutters is whatever the strand of hair is attached to on the hook, like some metal piece that they're cutting there. But it's really weird to set up like, oh yeah, this strand of hair is so durable, it can take 1,000 pounds. There's no issue here whatsoever. Give me some bolt cutters.
The other thing that I was like, what the hell is Superman is quite the jerk in this one, in the sense that he kisses Lois and makes her remember and stuff, and then he kisses her again and makes her forget. I'm like, dude,
oh my God,
what are you doing?
Yes.
We're going to put a pin in that one because I have such a huge conversation about that one because I didn't know that was going to be in this movie. And it blew my fucking mind. Like, my wife and I were watching this, and she dipped out after a certain point. It's Superman 4, so she didn't really feel like she had to stay to the end. She's like watching it while we're like finishing dinner, and she's like, wait, did they just do the mind erase kiss again? And I was like, I think they did. So we're going to come back to that one because that, oh man, we have so much to talk about with that one. Because I know I did not see that coming. I have some real thoughts.
Then my other point was Superman rebuilds the Great Wall with his eyes. How?
Okay. So the movies have always been pretty bad in terms of like representing Superman's powers. Like all of them have like kind of introduced new things. To be fair, it is a tradition of Superman media to create new powers for him, such as like, well, I guess he's really flying now being from the radio show. But I know why that happened the way it did. I also, if this were another past my other show, I have an immediate fix for it, which is just like, I know that the budget for this movie got slashed horrifically, that they could not afford a lot of this stuff. My solution, instead of just being a beam, was just the claymation that they're doing with the wall. That part is actually fine. You know, it doesn't look great, but like you can live with it. If instead of it being like a beam effect, like they just did a blue and red streak, just like have it like rush past like 2 times. Yeah. Don't have like a figure, just do like a gradient wipe. And then like, oh, hey, he put it together. He's Superman. like it would be a cheap special effect, but it wouldn't be like an offensive special effect.
Totally fair. And then the other one is, during that double date sequence, can't the doorman at the hotel see Clark changing into Superman?
Yes.
When he runs in and out the hotel?
Or the car.
It's like, what the hell, dude? What happened to that identity thing? But the worst one of all is, wouldn't Lacey die in space?
Yes.
Thank you.
Like that was a scene from Power Rangers right there, where it's just like, oh, I guess you can breathe in space. It's fine.
And of course, there's Nuclear Man's nails.
Right, yes.
Oh my God.
Or just the fact that he has to be in direct sunlight to function, period.
I'm like, dude, what's with the nails? Seriously? I had to suffer through Sabretooth with the granny nails. Now we have to have this.
It was definitely a choice that could have been dropped. But they decided to keep going with it.
Lots of choices were made in this movie that are strange. As I alluded to, some of these things make sense. We know that a lot of the movie was cut out. 45 minutes were cut out, supposedly, so they could get more screenings. So there's a lot of scenes that explain things that happen in this movie that we just don't know. Like, we just don't know what was supposed to happen there. There should have been a thing to cover this one. Like, when the Nuclear Man's, like, trying to chase down Lacey at the end, and it's like, where's the woman? It's like, you'll never find her. Why?
And how does Superman know that it's Lacey he's looking for?
Right, exactly. Those scenes that were cut. Like, there's a whole plot thread that actually, like, kind of, like, explains some of that. Those are moments where it's just like, okay, they chopped out way too much. And then there's the stuff like the Great Wall stuff where the budget was $37 million initially, and it was cut down to 17 right before they went into production. So all pre-production was based around like, yeah, we've got this money to do all these things. And then as soon as they were about to start filming, Canon,
in their infinite wisdom,
being Canon, embezzled a shitload of money and diverted it to finish up all these other projects that they were working on, trying to like make some money. Which is really egregious when you consider the fact that Warner Brothers put up specifically $40 million for this movie. So the budget wasn't even what Warner Brothers contributed, and they weren't the sole producer on this movie.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
And what blows my mind is 3 people wrote this story. 3 people.
Yep. Right after the credits, we get this like shot of Superman saving a Russian satellite, which is kind of a nice moment there in terms of like Superman being this like entity of peace. I like this detail that they have throughout that every time he saves someone in a different country, he speaks their language.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like a really nice detail.
I will say as an Italian, Christopher Reeve's Italian is not that bad.
I'm okay with him having a terrible accent, but like him speaking it, period, it could be way worse.
Oh, but believe you me, at least he's not pretending to be Italian. I've seen actors who play Italians and they can't speak it. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Get out of my office. Seriously.
Like, did you just say bippidibe and expect us to believe that those were real words?
They did good. He did good. I will tip my hat to Christopher Reeve on those few words he does speak in Italian, because that is correct. That is correct Italian.
Excellent. It's good that he actually like took the effort to nail those parts.
Yeah.
But I like this element of him being a figure that's greater than just America. Like I like that he tries to understand the languages of the people. He's out there to help everyone. So those are nice elements. So the model work in this movie is actually surprisingly okay. I don't want to say good, but it's surprisingly okay. It's mostly the compositing and the matte work and the special effect work that is really bad. But the model work's actually like fairly okay. So like this Russian satellite or ship or whatever that's happening right at the beginning to set up like, oh yeah, we're dealing with like the Ruskies right now. Oh, there might be nuclear war stuff. Like the end of the Cold War. Mm-hmm. So it's like a good time to be like, oh yeah, we can come together in peace. The model work's actually not that bad. Like the satellite, it looks fine. Yeah. Like they even do some like inserts in there to like have what appears to be either they just light it really well and like do something with a shadow to make it look like people are moving around inside, or they actually do like the Star Trek thing where they like insert in the window like shots of people
maybe
inside
that's what
sets.
They did.
I'm not sure which, but like it looks pretty good. There are several spots where I'm like, you know what? It looks like a special effect, but it's one that like I can live with. And maybe some of that is coming from the perspective of it's 2023 right now, and practical special effects are at a premium. We just don't see them as often. And so like I have a soft spot for things like Godzilla movies, like, you know, with like people in suits.
Or the first Jurassic Park movie where Spielberg was, or even Jaws, a mixture of practical and special, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and those are like the high watermarks, but even cheap stuff like, you know, I referenced Power Rangers before, like the model work in the early seasons of that looks pretty good to me. There's a realm of authenticity just by virtue of the fact that it is still a physical thing being filmed, even if it is being filmed at a scale and they're trying to play with your perceptions of stuff. That I appreciate. But like I said, I don't know if I would have appreciated it in 1987 where that was the norm. The fact that it is rarer to see those kind of things in a superhero movie, sure, I may not have appreciated it as much then, but it holds up better than you would think, considering that it's still like very cheap special effect. And then we get the first of that Superman flying shot, which happens somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 20 times. I don't know the exact count, but he's got his cape flowing, so that's actually pretty good right there. But man, the blue screen, green screen, whatever they're doing for compositing is so bad in this movie. Every single shot that they insert a thing, you have this deep outline around everyone. Yes. And then the color correction is really bad. Like I could have lived with like Star Wars type, like black lines around everyone as they're moving around, especially in space, because most of these shots are either space or they're flying in a city kind of thing. But man, everyone's skin tone looks terrible. Like their eyes are all this like color of pink. Like everyone looks like they are horrifically hungover.
It might have been filmed this movie.
I was about to say, and to be fair, they might be.
Exactly.
Like,
I mean, I kind of forgave that stuff because I mean, I know it's huge, etc. But I suppose maybe, like I mentioned before, having been a Doctor Who fan for the longest time, even watching classic Who from way back when, I've seen really bad stuff, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners out there who are probably Whovians themselves know what I'm talking about. So I'm like, yeah, it's horrible. But I was more bothered about, as I said, the major plot holes in the story rather than the effects. But I get your point there, Case. The compositing and stuff was really, really bad.
I'm not trying to say that like the special effects took me out of the movie, but the special effects are notoriously bad. Yeah. Honestly, trying to say I liked the model work. I'm not trying to shit on all of the special effects completely. I'm just acknowledging they look pretty bad. Here's why they look bad. But every time they have a physical item, those parts actually look pretty good. Even the Great Wall being like rebuilt. Yeah, it looks like claymation, but it could be worse. It could be worse. It's more just like he has random like energy powers to like move it around. That like looks particularly bad. As opposed to like, again, like if they put a streak in there, it would have been like, yeah, that's fairly cheap, but like, okay. Yeah. It doesn't ruin the movie for me here.
I mean, there's another scene where it happens.
Well, there's some spots where there's the Nuclear Man's rough. The Nuclear Man is very rough, and the special effects for the Nuclear Man are also bad. And so that combination of them is you're not getting the spectacle, and you're also not getting a story that makes sense. It's two bad tastes that taste even worse together. Those are the spots that bother me.
I actually have to ask you guys, what did you make of the fact that Mr. Pillow wasn't allowed to use his own voice, and we had Lex's voice instead of his own?
I don't mind it that much.
Bad.
We should note Mark Pillow, who that name stood out as soon as
I love that name. I mean, who doesn't want to be called Pillow as a last name? It's like, let me be your pillow, baby.
I said to my wife, because I hadn't looked up like who Mark Pillow was at the time, I was like, that's either got to be a person who's fluffy or a person who's super ripped. And it went with super ripped. But yeah, he was a Chippendales dancer they found to like take the part. So I have to assume that like there was a lot of concern going into it in terms of like, well, what is he going to sound like? Is he going to be able to deliver any kind of good lines? And I don't really mind getting some more Gene Hackman in there. Gene Hackman came back as a favor to Chris Reeve. So like, all right, cool. It doesn't take me out too much. I get the idea that Gene Hackman would create a construct that would have his own voice. Like that made enough sense to me.
So I guess he put his own DNA in it, maybe.
Yeah.
That feels like something that every Lex would do.
Yeah, I mean, like, weirdly, taking Superman's DNA and then combining it with whatever Gene Hackman was doing this kind of becomes a prototype for the Con-El Superboy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is weird to say out loud because I love that character, but oh no.
They ruined him on Titans, mind you.
Not the main point, but it is fascinating, like the idea of like Lex also has created multiple characters who are like Superman before.
Sure.
He's created Bizarro, or at least some of the Bizarros that are out there. And he created the negative Superman. And like, I have a big thought about Nuclear Man being like, well, couldn't they have just done negative Superman? Like, you could have used that actor. You could have used Mark Pillow and just like done a photo negative of him and made his costume look kind of more Superman-like. Could even still be different. But then that's a really easy effect to do because like they're shooting this on film. Like they could have easily just like done the negative for that one character in there. And you could even have an aura of negative energy. So you don't even need to worry about the line work being particularly good for it. So it could have just been like, oh, all light kind of like gets absorbed by this character who is, a solar battery or like a solar cell, I should say. And it's like, okay, cool. That could have been like kind of a fun way to handle this thing. With film adaptations, I try to hold back from saying, oh, but like the comics, but it is always fun where you could be like, it could be more like this thing from the comics and do a better job at doing the storytelling. Being comic accurate isn't enough to save a piece. Like that is not the thing that is going to save any movie if it's a bad movie to begin with. But if it could have done a cool effect that would have tied it to the comics, so it is fan service in that regard and would have looked cool and have kind of solved an issue they had with the design of this character, then that would have been like kind of a nice way to go about it. And in that scenario, him sounding like Lex Luthor would make perfect sense. It would have been great.
Once again, explain, movie, explain.
Yeah. Before we get to them on the subway scene, we actually get a scene at the Kent farm that is being sold that never comes up again. There's one little piece of it that matters, which is that Superman goes to the Kent farm, he opens up the barn, and underneath we get the whole, there's the rocket is down there thing. And in it, we get the voice of Laura saying like, all of our awesomeness, like here, if you use it, never again, which seems to be a theme of like all the Kryptonian stuff. I actually rather liked it. In terms of it being a cheap way to do the Krypton stuff, I think it looked pretty good. It's just like glowing green kind of spaceshipy kind of thing. And here's a crystal that looks like the crystal we saw in the previous movies. Like I said, I think it looked pretty good overall. Like it's a cheap way of doing it, but like
fair.
I assumed we weren't going to get the fortress. Later, that was different. But at the time, I assumed like, oh yeah, okay. They don't want to show the fortress right now because that's expensive. That's fine. This is a good way to like set it up a little bit.
Nope.
And then we get this whole we're selling the farm bit. And that's where it gets real weird.
I just wanted to point out kudos to Susanna York, who did a great job as the voice of Lara. She's a fantastic actress who's sadly no longer with us, but she did a great job voicing Lara. That I will say. That was one of the few highlights for me of this movie.
Yeah, again, that whole scene, I thought the actual delivery of it all, like there was the appropriate gravitas to it. And like there is actually like this somberness to being at the Kent farm and it's clearly for sale. There's all the stuff being moved out. Like that all looks really good. It answers the question that we had when we talked about Superman 3 of where is Ma Kent? Like she's definitely dead by this point. It's like, okay, cool. Like we're handling that. But then the scene doesn't do anything and there's no like connecting things later on. The realtor comes by and they like chat for a bit. And they talk about how, oh, we don't want to turn it to strip malls. So there's this like fight against modernity that I actually rather like in that sequence. We see Clark's crib that he put his foot through as a baby. And like, that's like, all right, that's like kind of
cool.
A cute little bit right there. And like, like, well, why don't we play a quick bit of catch? or like, here's a baseball bat. I'll throw you a ball. Oh, Clark, you're so clumsy. You can't even hit the ball. All right. Well, that was fun. Good talk. I'll see you later. And like, that's it. Then Clark does the Superman 1 thing where he like throws the ball up in the air and hits it with a baseball bat as Superman and sends it flying into space, which could have been really funny if that tied into anything.
And the guy didn't even keep the baseball glove, which he gave to him.
Yeah.
Right. It's a nothing scene. It's so weird that they even bother.
Yeah, he's like, cheers for the glove. I'll give it to my kid or something. No, he just leaves it there with him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I am assuming that some of the scenes that were cut involved this plot thread. But at that point, why even have this plot thread? I'm guessing because it sets up the crystal awkwardly, because when the guy pulls up, Clark puts it in his pocket very obviously. And in my head, I was like, oh, is that going to be like the thing that they use to make the nuclear man? Like, is that going to be important in some way? And no, it just shows up later when he's like dying and he uses it to power himself back up again. Because, right, like it felt like a Chekhov's gun situation.
Yeah,
like,
it was.
Yeah, it was like a very clear shot of him pocketing it. It was just a lot of footage to be spending on this thing for it only to be a minor MacGuffin later on in the movie.
Yeah. It was like, again with the crystals.
Right, yeah. The scene itself would be cute if it went anywhere. But the fact that just nothing happens from it is so weird.
Most of this movie.
But then Clark returns to Metropolis? ? Like there are signs for New York that are up in it, even though it's supposed whatever.
I was like, wait a second.
And again, they're filming it in the London Tube, so none of it quite matches right. And I could live with everything having the wrong styles. Like I could live with an American city having a European style subway system if it was a fictional city, but. But what city are we in? I don't know.
I mean, there wasn't even like a caption. Was there a caption saying Metropolis? There might have been, I think.
I don't think so. There was one for Smallville, but I don't think there was one for when he pulled up to the city.
They could have just put in the caption. That would have helped. That would help explain things.
Yeah. And then we get a straightforward Superman changes in a phone booth, steps out as Superman. When the engineer on the subway has a heart attack, and so it starts going too fast, and everyone's like, oh, it's going really fast, that's weird, but Lois is like, this is dangerous, and is the only person to scream for help. And so Clark races to save the day. She's the only one who notices that they're all going to die.
How did no one see him? This is one of those times I'm like, somebody should have seen Clark transform, because he just literally steps into it and then steps in out. Like the middle of a busy subway area surrounded by all these people, and no one thought of like, hey, that guy's taking his clothes off in the middle.
Yeah. It's weird. And like, this is a series that has always played the Superman costume changes for irony. Mm-hmm. They make a point in the first movie of like, oh, well, most of the phone booths aren't like full phone booths anymore. Right. The most that we've ever gotten it so far has been in Superman 3, where it's like the photo booth. And like, that's a cute bit, especially because he tears off the other ones and gives it to the kid. That's like a fun moment right there. But then this is just like, oh yeah, we're going to do like the George Reeves version of the transformation without any of the sort of like tongue-in-cheek kind of elements that the movies so far have had. All of the 70s, 80s Superman movies have been at least aware that like Superman is just so well known in pop culture that like you don't need to set up a lot of these details. Like you can poke fun at so much of it. Mm-hmm. And this movie has like completely moved away from any of that sense of irony to just be like, oh yeah, we'll just play it straight. We'll just do it exactly. I think that's where this movie starts to get weird. It plays straight all the things that would have been at least understood to be weird. Like Superman's weird. All the things about Superman are weird. It's a weird concept. Like Krypton's a weird concept. Let's play it up as like a weird place to be that looks like an out there 70s sci-fi kind of thing. It's all weird. And this movie kind of doesn't acknowledge that it's weird. And I kind of miss that part of it. I'm not saying it's a joke, but like everyone's aware that these are the conceits that we have about the franchise because that's part of the franchise.
I think so. I mean, I think the problem is it almost seemed like they just didn't care. That's the thing.
Right.
Just like, as I mentioned before, the doorman being clearly able to see Clark hop into the car and then pop out the other side of Superman. It's like, okay, you clearly don't care at this point.
Wait a second. He left his car unlocked.
Then after that, we get some Daily Planet stuff. Yep. Jimmy Olsen is looking very much like an adult in this movie at this point. The last time we saw him was in Supergirl, where he was dating a teenager, which was not cool. Unfortunately, no Popeyes appearances in this movie. I like the conceit, however, of the planet being bought out and then trying to turn it into kind of a sensationalist.
That I dug, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like that idea. I thought that was fun. I like the idea that the planet was hemorrhaging money. I really love the idea that Lois Lane is responsible for a lot of the money being like spent. There's a great line. I have questions about the delivery later, but there's a great line where she pulls up to, I think it's Superman, like addressing the UN. and like Lacey's like, they're going to ticket us. And she goes, it's only money.
I thought it was the other way around.
Exactly. But you're not the heiress at this point. What is the deal here, Lois? Or it's just like she's just so flippant about running up a tab. She doesn't care.
It's very strange. I get it. They're supposed to be the ones who are trying to be very frugal. We are directly dealing with that. We've already referenced it on this call, like that media people are being that way, where they're trying to like suck every penny out of it. Hell, this is a canon movie. That also kind of makes sense. Everyone could be like kind of upset about all this. But I do appreciate it from the standpoint of it being like very prescient. Like, I think that the idea that like Wall Street's going to buy out all of these established institutions that are important for society, like newspapers, and turn them into money-making machines and sell off all the pieces that aren't directly profitable. That's the story of the 90s and 2000s and today. I think that that part was very prescient. I think that the type of media that they're talking about there is where we go towards like the 24-hour news cycle. And I think that that's a really cool element to be addressing in a Superman piece, especially one at this time where it's so early in it all. I don't think they know what they're saying yet, but I think that it's cool that they're talking about it. So I like that detail. I rather like Lacey as a character in this movie. Like, there's too much stuff going on, despite how short this movie is. It would have been nice to see Lana again. That like, oh yeah, let's have another character in here. Is Lacey's last name an L thing? Are they at least like keeping that?
A Warfield? Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it would have been great if it was like Larfield or something, just so it could be another double L character.
But I mean, the fact that then she just kind of randomly has to throw herself at Clark, I thought was a bit much, to be honest.
Yeah.
But, you know, to your point, Case, that was one of the things I appreciate about this movie is the critiquing of sensationalism and how people these days almost no longer care about real news. They want, like, you know, the hot girl on the page. It's kind of like those papers like The Sun or The Mirror in England, for example, where it's all this very sort of fluffy stuff, which people just love, or gossip, if you will, more gossipy papers than anything else. I will also say it was nice to see Mr. Wanamaker, who's always a great actor. And Sam Wanamaker I think he did the best he could playing Mr. Warfield. But I'm like, Sam, what are you doing here? You are better than this. You gave us Zoe Wanamaker, so we're very happy that your daughter is also an accomplished actress. But dude, seriously.
Yeah.
He could have been much more formidable, I found, when it came to him being this tycoon who wanted to make all this sensationalist stuff. But like you said, a lot of it got cut. So it's a shame that he didn't become more of a menace, if you will, than what we got.
Yeah, I think all the Daily Planet stuff would be the first choice to cut, aside from, I guess, the Kent farm stuff. We know we're missing scenes with Lacey, at least. I'm assuming there's more Daily Planet stuff that we're missing. Because that would be the arc. Like, there's resolution at the end, but there isn't, like, a lot of... Like, they're not forced to do that much. Like, they just talk about it. Like, oh, we're going to do stories about this because it's interesting and it will sell papers. They don't really cross any lines yet. I'm concerned about this movie not really knowing what it's saying yet, but I do appreciate that it is saying something, period.
Agreed.
I think that there's an adorable bit when they're auditing all of the reporters' expenses where they ask Clark why he has no airfare charges.
Yes.
And I think that is so great. And that goes back to the oldest Superman stuff, like the original Superman radio serials when they're like, oh, we're going to go get your airfare stuff. And he just like disappears on them. And they're like, did he just jump out the window? So it goes back to like old school Superman stuff. And I adore that detail. I think that is perfect. Like, I want that all the time. Those kind of like cheeky kind of bits. And like, I think that's cool. Like, I think the idea of them liking Clark as a reporter because he's cheap is like a nice detail there too. You know, and then it's weird when they want to fire him at the end of the movie because he hasn't been around. It's just, they cut so much that there's all these like 2-step things in the movie and we don't get the third step somewhere in there. Like we don't get the middle step where like the tension increases or where like opinions change or the rule of 3 for jokes. Like, it's all just like, oh yeah, well, we got to set up and punchline and that's it. Like, there's no, like, there's nothing else going on with any of the narrative structure. It's all 2 beats instead of 3, which is definitely the editor just being way too aggressive.
And it also sacrifices character development as well. I mean, you look at Lacey's character. She starts off by being kind of the spoiled heiress, if you will. And it was like, oh, you know, daddy and all that and everything else. And then throwing herself at Clark. And then suddenly, oh, father, you can't do this. We have to make real news. Yeah. That was a very quick turnaround.
Yeah.
We have to do proper journalism, not sensationalism.
Right. The journey these characters go on is omitted from this movie.
Yeah.
which is a bummer because those are the spots that I really like. The human stuff I actually enjoy in this movie, even if there's going to be some stuff we'll talk about in a minute.
Oh my.
I do want to talk about the fucking kids' classroom that decides to like be like, man, they have this like sensationalist news report about like, oh yeah, peace summits are just going terribly. The talks are going really bad. Lots of nukes are being mounted. Now every nation wants nukes. Oh God, there's so many nukes. We're all going to die. Cut to like a third grade classroom. And they have this teacher who she doesn't show up again.
Nope.
They have like so much like direct coverage of her. And you know the thing where like you cast a person who doesn't look like the type if you want it to be like a standout character versus you cast like a very generic looking person if you want it to not be really stand out. Like if you want a librarian who's like no one's going to really think twice about, you put like an older woman in there and like have them look like a little bit frumpier and like kind of bookish. But if you put like someone who has like, you know, hot pink hair, it'll like be like, oh, that's going to be a character who matters. Yeah. Like that kind of dynamic there. She is so fucking hot that it really threw me where like, oh, this is not going to be a main character, but like she talks for a while. They do lots of like close-ups on her face. It's all this coverage where you're like, oh, that's a pretty person who's going to matter in this movie. And she doesn't at all. And then eventually we get to the kid who everyone teases in the back, who's just like, what if we wrote Superman and asked him to stop all the nukes? And like, my note is fucking what? like that's the inciting incident for this movie.
Oh man, it's terrible. And also, what's with the kid's accent? Because he starts sounding like Lenny Luthor, and then he changes his accent completely.
I think that's just adds to this whole like, wait, this was the decision that you used, and I get it that like Chris Reeve has received fan mail as Superman at this point, some of which is like, can you stop the world's problems? And I get that might be part of the inspiration, but in a world where Superman is a thing and where they don't do something really creative in terms of getting a letter to him. They just send a letter to the Daily Planet, who notoriously everyone just like kind of knows Superman there. Like a lot of people would be doing that like for a lot of things. And especially like if the world is at the state that the movie is presenting, people would be like, oh, hey, yeah, like maybe we should ask the guy who can literally do anything to do something,
possibly,
you know, to save the planet. Because then he takes it to heart. He's like, oh man, these kids, they said I should stop the nukes. Is that me going too far? Is that me going too far? And that's the moral conundrum that Superman goes through in this movie.
Yeah, because I was trying to understand that because he was like, I'm not supposed to interfere, but dude, you're saving human lives, etc. So what exactly does that mean? What is that debate that you're setting yourself on? Is you're saving people's lives, but oh, I can't interfere. Pick a lane, Superman, pick a lane.
Yeah, I had just caught up on Star Trek Strange New Worlds the night before. And so like Prime Directive stuff was very much on my head because there's like a couple episodes that really deal with that. And I get it. If Superman's like, oh, well, you know, the big stuff I can kind of interfere with, but I don't want to like really get into society stuff. Dude, like a nuke going off is going to be way bigger than just like a tidal wave, just in terms of like the amount of devastation.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to understand this internal struggle that he was having when he was just like saving people left, right, and center, and, you know, and foiling Lex Luthor's plans on a regular basis. Now nuclear war is a possible threat. It's like, I can't interfere, but I'll interfere anyway. I was like, what?
Right. So he goes to the Fortress of Solitude and talks with Kryptonian elders about what he should do. And I couldn't tell what they were telling him was the right thing to do.
I thought they were telling him not to do it.
Kind of, but then the scene like cuts off like mid-line from one of them. And there's like all this like shame. I was like, wait, are they saying he hasn't done enough? Are they saying humans are too primitive and that he shouldn't interfere with them? Is he saying that they need someone to guide the way? Because that's the whole Jor-El thing.
Because like one of them was like, yeah, you can just hop off to another planet if something happens. Nothing's going to bother you. And then another one was saying, yeah, we shouldn't interfere with like their day-to-day stuff because, you know, they're apes. And I was like, he can hop off to another planet? Would they actually say that to him?
Yeah, it's just such a weird kind of scene right there. The idea of Superman really interfering with global politics, especially with weapons of mass destruction, is a heady concept. Like, that is a thing that has been very well explored sometimes and very poorly explored plenty of times. So I understand, like, when you want to do a movie that's about that, you do want to spend some time with the character really thinking about it, which is why I really wish we spent more time with, like, Clark dealing with, like, the Daily Planet and talking about the growing nuclear tensions of the world. What is motivating him to, like, finally take that bigger step? Because it is a bigger step to, like, actually get in the way. Because, let's be honest here, if he's going to do that, he's going to have to go to war with the US.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
That's a big moment there. If he is making the decision that he's not just like a concerned citizen, that he actually has to step outside of being truth, justice, and the American way to being truth, justice, and, the Terran way, or just a brighter tomorrow, or whatever like alternate thing you want to do, that's fine. It's a big change for him. That could have been a really cool arc for the character. I don't think he would be set on that path just because a kid wrote a letter and then some newspapers made fun of him for it.
I mean, it would just be part of his moral code.
Right. Wrestling with it, that's fine. But it's just like, he definitely understood that nukes were out there before that letter comes. It's not like, oh, hey.
Oh, look, nukes. Okay.
Have you heard this thing called nuclear weapons?
Oh, jeez.
So I just want to call out this one. So Warfield starts like putting like smear campaigns for Superman not actually like saving the world, which, okay. But I did appreciate that we have very clearly them making fun of Gerald Ford when they're like, Superman says drop dead.
Oh, yeah.
Which is definitely a reference to Ford to New York, drop dead, when they were like facing as a city bankruptcy.
Mm.
So, nice little reference there. It's going to be fairly fresh on people's minds, like those kind of things. And again, I like all the media stuff. I like the newspaper stuff. And this is where it could be kind of going into that level of like, well, are they doing sensationalist things? Are they trying to influence politics? Are they moving past reporting on the news and trying to influence people? And I think that those are cool moments. The only thing they do in this movie for that is convince Superman to stop nuclear war, which I don't think is a bad thing. So, I mean, they go about it the wrong way, but it's not that bad.
And to go back to what you were mentioning about the Kryptonian elders, maybe they were trying to go about the whole concept of isolationism, possibly, or elitism, even for that matter, as in the old Kryptonians are elitist. And like J-Mike was saying, they're below them. So it's like, why should that be a problem? So it could play into like, isolationist politics, like say, when wars broke out in Europe, for example, and before the states came into the war, it's like, we are isolationists. It's not our problem. Why should we be involved? So it might be playing into that concept of, if it doesn't sort of influence us directly, why should we even get involved? This is below us, if you will.
Yeah, it does lead into one of the good elements of like Superman renouncing himself as being an observer and a visitor to our world and being part of our world. I think is a good sequence there.
Yeah.
Or at least it's a good line in a speech to give. I just happened to screenshot it, or happened to pause when he had like finished his address to the UN. And like, it ended up being a pretty good like pause moment. I shared it on Twitter. You guys like commented on it. I was like, oh yeah, that's like kind of a cute little like.
Yeah, that was before the movie went to shit.
Yes. It kind of made me think of Wizard of Oz in terms of its color correction.
Oh, God.
And he's like looking up as he's like walking out. And it felt very like 1940s Technicolor. And I just adored that moment there. That said, let's move on to the what the fuck that is the what the fuck that is the what the fuck of this movie, which is the memory kiss scene.
Why?
Oh my God.
I mean, they made Superman a creepo in Superman Returns. Here they make him a total bastard, like Professor Xavier, mind wiping.
This is so much worse. So much worse.
I could have sworn we were done with that whole thing. I never in a million years thought that was going to come back.
Yeah, I thought we all just agreed we're going to move on. Shit was weird. Zod had shown up from the Phantom Zone and had threatened to destroy the world. I get it. Like, stuff was really bad. Does he just go to Lois like every time he needs to like have like a heart-to-heart with her, gives her memories back, and then takes them away? Like, is that their relationship now?
How bloody selfish is he? I mean, seriously.
It's barbaric.
Yes. I mean, oh yeah, thank you for helping me. Boom, mind wipe. We're good.
Not to mention that he throws her off a building first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I need your help. Boom, down you go. That's what I'm saying is he's such a scumbag. This is not Superman.
It's atrocious. It was bad enough in Superman 2.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a recut, re-edit, like the whole Donner cut versus Lester cut. Mm-hmm. Like, it was a thing that was in there because ideas that they wanted to do with the time travel stuff wasn't going to happen because that was pushed to the first movie, a la the Death Star. Like, sure. Okay. Yes. I understand that they were like strapped for what they were going to figure out for like, okay, a big plot point is that Superman reveals who he is to Lois. We want to get back to status quo at the end of the movie. We can't use time travel. We did that last time. Memory erasing kiss. Fuck it. Sure. It was the one time. And he also like supposedly could never like go back to being human again because he had destroyed the technology to do it in the fortress, because all the fortress technology works once and that's it. Yeah. So
it's a one-time offer.
Right. But he brings her memories back. They have this whole sequence, and then he kisses her and walks out, and she's kind of like just pensive again. And I'm like, oh, like they know each other. She reveals that either she always remembered it or this like jogged her memory. Either way, oh, cool. He goes back in, changes, and she's like, why am I outside? And I'm like, oh no.
He did it again. He can't keep getting away with this.
Yeah, she's like, I'm outside here freezing my arse off. Why am I outside freezing my arse off?
Right, exactly. It's like, oh, because you wanted fresh air. And like, there was a moment I'm like, is this a game they play? Like, is this a game? Like, and then like, clearly she does not remember any of this stuff. And I'm like, oh no. Oh God, no.
It's bad.
It would be bad if a villain did this.
It's worse if the Superman does it.
Right. It's so much worse. I will say it does kind of start to explain. Margot Kidder is not looking good in this movie. I think she's going through some hard times at this point in her life. Her deliveries are often a little awkward. And probably the production is also not like super smooth. So she didn't have like a ton of time to work with her lines. But it's a rough performance by her. She is not nearly as charming or compelling as she was in previous appearances. Even Superman 3, she has like more sass to her than she does in this movie. And like most of the scenes, her blocking, again, like some of this could just be like in terms of the actual production itself is not playing nice with her, where she seems to not know where she wants to walk in any scene that she's in. And it could be explained that she's having brain damage by Superman constantly wiping her memories.
I like that one better.
I like that one too. It's like at this point, she says, I feel like I have jet lag. So, you know, it's like he's seriously fucking with her brain at this point. It's like, dude, this is not healthy.
Right. It's kind of cheeky with like Men in Black or something like that. But when we're dealing with it being Superman doing this repeatedly to a person, it's rough. And like their interactions are rough. And it feels kind of selfish, especially because he's then going on dates simultaneously. And the double date scene is cute, but shouldn't happen. So we get the it's only money scene. We get the Superman delivery, and we get World Powers being like very worried about it. And I like that detail too. I like that the people who are invested in the military industrial complex are worried that Superman is going to destroy their cash cow. That I think is a great idea. I think that's fucking dope. I love that Lex Luthor appeals to them for it. I think that's great. John Cryer, actually, I really liked this movie.
Really? So you didn't find him annoying?
Not that much.
Okay.
He's supposed to be the annoying nephew. I think he did okay in The Task. Like, most of his deliveries weren't that bad.
Yeah, I
actually didn't mind him, yeah.
He wasn't the most egregious part of this film.
No, agreed. And I thought it was ironic that he would then play a very good Lex Luthor in the CW years later.
Yes. Honestly, Gene Hackman's portrayal as Lex in this isn't even that bad either. No. He's just in a bad movie. I thought it was like kind of fun when he like drove in and like confused the guards with the sound system. I thought that was kind of a funny sequence there. The fact that they go out of their way to be like, oh, they didn't die was
it's like, why? Like, I mean, the car exploded and they came out like of a Laurel and Hardy movie. Major explosion, but we just, have soot on our faces.
But like the Lenny character, like,
it's fine.
Yeah.
That part could have been so much worse.
Yes.
Like, he looks like he's going to be a really annoying character. Yeah. And he's supposed to be an annoying character, but I think he played the annoying character well so that I loved to hate him as opposed to hated that I had to hate him.
Right. I mean, it means that John Cryer did his job if he's annoying.
Yeah. But annoying in a way that, like, worked with the scenes, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Like, he was never, like, too bad. Most of his deliveries of the jokes that they gave him actually were, like, kind of funny. Like, you know what that means, Uncle Lex? We're going to be parents. Like, was actually, like, kind of funny.
I think they had also decent chemistry between each other, John Cryer and Gene Hackman. I think they worked well off each other.
Yeah, and I think, like, if your scene partner is Gene Hackman, you're in a pretty good space.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been fun if they were going to have the nuclear-powered character that they're creating. They immediately jumped to being like, I'm going to make a nuclear man. A nuclear man. He's going to be a nuclear man. If they called him an atom man, then it's a reference to the first big supervillain fight that Superman had in larger media, like the radio show Atom Man, which we're getting to on this series, like eventually. But the Atom Man has had some love recently because he showed up on Superman and Lois and he showed up in Superman Smashes the Klan. So recently, so he's on my mind, but I've always loved that radio serial. And it's not like it's some unknown thing. It's like infamously this huge thing that would work very well here. And it would have been just like kind of fun from a name standpoint. Also, Atom Man just flows a little better than Nuclear Man. I don't know. Maybe not, but
wouldn't it have been hilarious if they'd called him Radioactive Man?
Yes. Up and at them.
Exactly.
But this is where I get into the whole, like, well, what in the ever-loving fuck is the Nuclear Man's design? Like, why does he look the way he does? Like, when he first shows up and he's, like, glowing red coming out of the sun, I was like, if they just kept that effect going, I wouldn't really mind this character. Like, if he looked like he was an energy being, I could deal with it. Like, even the stupid costume, if it's under a particle effect, I wouldn't have a huge problem with. I don't understand why that costume exists. They put, like, a shred of clothing and it forms into, like, this thing. And it's like, well, why? Like,
he'll grow into it.
Like, why any of that? And this is where I'm saying, like, if it had been a negative Superman, that could have been a really easy to do visual effect that would have looked pretty cool. You could have kept it being a construct. You could have kept the Gene Hackman voice. You could have kept that actor and just had him be like in like a Superman outfit, but because his color scheme is inverted, it wouldn't look like it's weird that it's not Christopher Reeve's face. Apparently, in the 45 minutes that we lost, they also have a failed attempt at creating a Nuclear Man that is like a botched one with a different actor playing the part.
Oh.
Which would have been a great spot for a Bizarro.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do, actual props.
Could it maybe be because we'd already had kind of Superman fighting himself in previous movies?
Yes. So that is the counterpoint on that all. My counter to the counter is that the Nuclear Man is still a clone of Superman in this movie.
Fair.
Just modified and has like powers that are roughly comparable. So yes, they didn't want to do just like evil Superman. So I agree. Probably Bizarro would be not the way to go. I think negative Superman, especially if they don't even have an S shield on him, if it's just like an inverted like thing, they could keep the name, but this way they could at least like hint at it being like kind of like some of these earlier constructs that Lex Luthor had made in the comics. It could still be Nuclear Man or Atom Man, but he's my counter to Superman. He's, the darkness to your light. He absorbs all the light around him kind of thing. Could have been cool. And again, a cheap special effect that wouldn't have been that hard to do, even in 1987.
I mean, maybe I'm giving this movie too much credit when I say this, but could it maybe be that choosing a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy and having the whole concept of the sun, they wanted to make him look like an Aryan, if you will, or like a Nazi in inverted commas, because the sun cross of the swastika, him having blonde hair and blue eyes, it's like, maybe we're going to make him into the Superman, i.e., more Nietzschean, if you will, or more Hitlerian, if you will, kind of Superman.
Entirely possible. There's a lot of Jewish roots to the character of Superman, so it wouldn't be that hard to like set up that distinct difference between them. If it's supposed to be part of the War Machine, you could have like kind of played with all that. I don't mind the casting for this guy.
Oh, me either.
I just think that the costume they put him in, and then for whatever fucking reason, they're like, let's give him big fucking nails.
Yeah.
Like nails that he can grow out. And then he like cuts Superman at one point, and Superman's like super sick afterwards.
Radiation sickness.
And I was like, wait, is that radiation sickness? Like, but in that scenario, have him be a fucking kryptonite man. Allude to the fact that like he's kryptonite-esque if he's going to do that.
Yeah.
Have the lightning going around his body be green instead of yellow.
I mean, heck, you could have done Metallo at that point.
Yeah.
Or the Kryptonite Man. There's so many characters that this could have been. And I get it. They don't necessarily have the rights to everything from DC. I get all of these things. But you could have had like just a more interesting thing than just what we got in this movie.
Yeah.
Particularly because like, yeah, they don't want to have just like Superman fight Superman again because that happened in Superman 3. But we still got a clone of Superman effectively that he's fighting with, again, with comparable powers. So we've actually had 3 movies in a row where he's been dealing with like characters who are like evil versions of himself. Because we had Zod in the Criminals in 2. We had being split in 2 in 3.
Yeah.
And in this, then we have the Nuclear Man. And the fight is very much like the super criminal fight in 2, or like stuff that we would see in Man of Steel.
I mean, or could it maybe have been a concept maybe coming out of Rocky 4, where you have a Draco kind of character?
Yes, and apparently a lot of people think Dolph Lundgren was the person who played the part of the Nuclear Man. And it gets funnier because simultaneously Canon was also putting out Masters of the Universe, which did have Dolph Lundgren.
There you go. So maybe they're like, oh, we'll have, Superman's version of Draco in this.
Yeah. That said, man, I actually really like Masters of the Universe. I think like it's clearly a low budget movie. It barely got finished. Part of the charm is the fact that it's so low budget.
Yeah. The saving grace that I think who is it? Frank Langella who plays Skeletor?
Yes, he's so good in that as
He
Skeletor.
is the saving grace of that movie is Frank Langella.
Yes, 100%. The whole time he is selling these scenes that like no one else could have sold. And I only bring this up to point out that like that is a similar movie in a similar circumstance. They actually had a bigger budget, but they ran out at the end. But it's a scenario where like it's seen as like a sister flop in this whole scheme of things. But I think that ended up being a better movie coming from the same studio at the same time.
And a very generic Williams-like score as well.
Also true, yeah. I don't want to just hate on the Nuclear Man as a whole, because as a concept, it could be fine. Again, like I keep pointing out ways that, like, you know, you could have done this, this, and this, and it would all be like a little bit more like a comic, or a little bit more interesting, or it would explain the thing a little bit better. I think it's really close to being like a viable plot. We don't get any exposition for why he looks the way he does. And so we could have got that whole, like, we're going to create like this perfect avatar of war that will be representative of all the fears that America has, or that the world has. So it'll drive up nuclear weapons because they have to deal with a nuclear man or something like that. You know, you could have like made this whole like story for him exist better. You could have had effects that would make him look really cool. You could have done something that would indicate the whole like powered up versus not powered state for the light stuff. Like he gets the lightning sometimes when he like first wakes up, but you know, you could have done something. It's a rough character. Mm-hmm. It's not the only thing that makes this movie not work, but it's a rough character that in a different movie, they could have made something work. It would have required a different design and some different thoughts, but like there's like back when Man of Steel first came out.
Oh God, here we go.
Actually, no, I'll take it even back further. So back when Superman Returns first came out, a lot of people were talking about how it was really weird that Superman Returns was very lacking in action sequences. You know, it was compared a lot with X-Men 3, where Bryan Singer had left. And, you know, Bryan Singer, we found out a lot more since. But, like, you know, X-Men 1 and 2, people really liked. And then X-Men 3, Brett Ratner, kind of fucked up.
Also a problematic director in general, Superman Returns. Yeah. Problematic director, problematic actors, and it kind of seeped into the movie.
Yeah. But, like, a lot of conversation was like, well, X-Men 3 had good action, but just no heart to it because, you know, it just didn't have brain cells actually going into anything that was in the output. And then you look at Superman Returns and it was like, there's some good stuff. Like Brandon Roth is like a great Superman. And like the plane sequence is really cool. Mm-hmm. And like, there's like good things in there. And like, clearly Bryan Singer is a better director in terms of composing a sequence than Brett Ratner was. It's just the story didn't provide like the high energy people were looking for in a Superman movie. And so there was a lot of conversation of like, well, if Singer had stayed on X-Men 3, would that have been more interesting if you had gotten sort of like this fusion of like cooler action with like a little bit more emotional story beats going on? And likewise, when Man of Steel came out, there was that comparison between Man of Steel and Superman Returns as the only two 21st century Superman movies at that point. One is like it's a little navel gazing, it's a little creepy. It's got the whole like
Stalker
I
Superman.
have a child with Lois, but they don't remember it kind of thing.
Did he kiss her before that too?
I don't think they do the kiss in that movie.
I'm just saying, just in general. Like, did he kiss her?
They just reference back to Superman 2, basically.
Did he kiss her and make her forget that she had a kid with him?
I mean, apparently, but they imply that it was the kiss from Superman 2. But apparently, this movie could have also just been like, what happened? And then like
and
he just did this all the time.
So creepy in that movie, Superman is.
They definitely have had sex. And then he's wiped her memory.
Yeah, as I was thinking, like, you know.
I don't even need to say they definitely, because that happens in Superman 2. It's happened since.
Mm-hmm.
and then he's such a peeping Tom in Superman Returns.
Yeah. So you've got all the creepiness of Superman Returns, and then you've got kind of the overly action-focused Man of Steel, where the more introspective elements are not deep enough. They tried to do the whole Jonathan Kent being like, oh, well, you should not reveal yourself to the world. We're not ready for it. You're proof of life out there in the universe, kind of yada, yada, yada. But like the things people really remember are the really big action sequences in that movie. Like there's some really cool moments. The Smallville fight is very cool. Mm-hmm. A little too product placement-y, but you know, there's some good moments in there. And like there's some good drama. The fight with Zod, we talked about this recently. Like there's a lot of fine in that movie. And there's a lot of like good moments that like aren't like used appropriately. And so you end up in this scenario where Superman Returns and Man of Steel both are providing some things we like and some things we don't in their Superman movies. And this one, if you had any of these other directors working on it with any of these other budgets, like this movie could have been so much better. That's what I'm trying to get at.
I always regret the sadness that Nolan was supposed to direct Man of Steel and then apparently started writing. So apparently some of the stuff that we get in Man of Steel is partly written by Nolan. And I think that's the deep stuff. I mean, I'm not saying that Nolan always makes great movies. Looking at you, Tennant, but for the most part, he knows how to tell a story.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish that Nolan had directed Man of Steel, but we'll never get that. So it's pointless to even say that. But whatever.
Yeah. So let's move on, because like the Negative Man, or not the Nuclear
the Negative Man would have been better.
Yeah, Negative Man would have been better. The Nuclear Man doesn't work in this movie. Fundamentally, just doesn't come together. And the fight itself, this is where it gets really frustrating, because they cut so much of like the story stuff and kept the fight with the Nuclear Man in there. But the Nuclear Man fight looks terrible because they have no money for their budget.
It's like we ran out of money at this point. This is what you get, kids.
Through the styrofoam, guys.
Like, we don't care anymore. Go for it.
There's one point after the Great Wall where someone is being telekinetically affected by the Nuclear Man, and Superman apparently uses telekinesis to stop it, but they do no special effect whatsoever. It's just he looks at it and it just stops. They do
the sound effects for it, but that's it.
Yeah.
So he has telekinesis now? Okay.
Right. And again, like, the movies have been kind of vague of if he has that or not, but they didn't need to be. They could have just, again, like, done a blue and red wipe and like...
Yeah.
And fine.
They like to play very fast and loose with his powers on this movie.
Yeah. My notes are like, all of the fights with Nuclear Man are extremely silly. The fact that he gets like slashed, and that's the only wound he takes from the Nuclear Man, and that takes him out of action completely. I get it's radiation poisoning. Counterpoint, it's Superman.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Like, do something with it. Like, explain why it's an issue. And what is the Nuclear Man doing? Also, he would figure out the whole like sun power pretty fast. He figures it out pretty quickly, puts him in the elevator, flies him to the moon, and then just like leaves him there and goes and like looks the flag.
I was like, hey, why not just fling him in the opposite direction? And
why not put boulders over him?
Well, if you fling him in the opposite direction from the Earth, like the sun, diminishes its power going that way. So I'm like, fight's over, roll credits. But I'm going to put
throw him onto
moon.
Pluto, furthest rock from the sun.
It's like, what the heck?
Something. Or again, like he puts him in the elevator, clearly realizes he's depowered, flies him to the moon, and then he just leaves him there, apparently with enough of a gap that when sunlight comes up on the moon, it reactivates his powers. Like, put some boulders on top, and then problem is solved.
Bury him.
Yeah, do what Nuclear Man did to you. Bury him, for crying out loud.
Yeah. This exact plot honestly could have been made better, and it wouldn't have been so rough. But even with the production values of this movie, even with the directorial skills, even with all the cast, I'm very curious about these missing scenes, because I could very much imagine at least a more compelling plot from the material we have, which is a high watermark. I was very curious going into this because I've heard of this longer cut and I've heard that it's better. And I was like, is it actually possible considering what we got? And watching this movie, I will say, yeah, I think that it does interesting themes with the media. It has some very 80s love letters to all the aerobic gyms that are in vogue at the time.
Hilarious.
Gym culture, good.
Yeah, when they cut to that shot, I thought we were watching Toxic Avenger for a moment.
I was going to say the same thing, And they critiqued gym culture really well in Toxic Avenger.
Yeah. Now, Toxic Avenger was on the earlier side of that. So at this point, it had become like fully entrenched into society. But you know what? It was fine. And it was fun. And I liked that the one gym bro.
No pain, no gain.
Was like kind of messing with Clark. And then once Lacey was gone, he was just like, oh, hey, here's your super heavyweight.
No pain, no gain. And off he goes.
Yeah. Like, not the nicest thing that he could do, but like, it was fine.
He's done worse jerky things in this movie.
Yes, exactly. Man, Lacey is so thirsty for him.
Yeah.
And I like that approach. Like, I like the Cat Grant concept of, well, wait, Clark is like a 6'2", really nice guy with perfect skin and like awards for how good of a writer he is. Women are going to like him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people are just going to like this guy. He's very nice. He's going to help everyone. He's going to do all the right things. And he's never going to be mean to you. And he's well-to-do. Like, his apartment's great. He has a very nice apartment.
In Metropolis, New York, some city.
Yeah, wherever it is. It's a great apartment with a balcony, a wonderful terrace that he can throw Lois off of. So I like the idea that, like, Lacey would be, like, kind of into him. Like, that, I think, makes a lot of sense. I even like the idea of being like, well, the Daily Planet is such an important institution that Perry White would get behind it all. Now, it's funny thinking that, like, well, we know how print media goes in the next 20 years. But at the time, like, all right, yeah, no, it's important. And he wants to make sure that it's not being chopped up for the purpose of making money. I think that's a good goal. I think that's actually a pretty good plot thread right there. I think that's something to do. I think the idea of Superman wrestling with like his role in the world and should he interfere with the larger geopolitical scene, also a good thing to wrestle with. I think the fact that everyone just cheers and it's all fine. Sure, we get the military industrial guys who are upset about his new, aggressive stance. It would have been nice to see like the president really mad at Superman, like play up the world being kind of frustrated. Wasn't going to happen in this movie. This movie is very much way more kid friendly than that kind of movie would be. Like 1987, they weren't going to make like a big budget movie. Big budgets and very big quotes right now. But they weren't going to make a movie that was going to vilify America quite so much. That sort of level of introspection just wasn't popular in the mainstream media in Reagan's America at that point.
Fair, yeah.
But it's a cool idea. And, we would see much better works that sort of like examine all that. And some of those works are happening right at that point in comics. Like 1987 is right when we're getting Watchmen, right when we're getting Dark Knight Returns. Squadron Supreme had wrapped up like 2 years before that. There's a lot of like really big moments. Like, well, what if a superpowered being really made a stand and like really changed the world? And those are all cool ideas. Like, I dig the idea of Superman trying to figure out how to thread that needle. He's like going to go to the UN and try to be like, look, guys, I've been here for a while. I have always felt like an outsider, but this is getting dangerous and I need to make a move and I'm the only one who can do it. It's just going to have to be that way. I get the idea that it's a difficult thing to sell, that you're going to step in and take over everything, to act extrajudicially from such a standpoint above, really make humanity as a whole feel small instead of like lifting them up because it's such a huge deal. I get that. And I see them trying to write that speech appropriately. And it's not that far from like a good version of that speech.
It's not bad.
There's some good moments there. And at the end of the movie, when he's like, maybe I went too far, which I don't think anything happened that showed that he had learned a lesson about that. Like, well, maybe I went too far, but maybe all of humanity will come together and understand to like put down their weapons. Like, no, you hadn't learned that lesson. That's not the moral that you should be picking up from all this right now, guys. So many things that I like about this movie, but it's still just not a great movie.
But you know what? I think it's almost serendipitous that you guys elected to review this movie now, seeing what is happening in the real world today, with once again the possible threat of nuclear war being on the rise again, between the war going on in the Ukraine, the mounting tensions between Russia and the United States. So it's kind of apt, if you will, for what is actually going on today,
right.
Sadly, or even what's been discussed even in the Secret Invasion when it comes to all that. So sadly, it is very apt. Humanity is doomed to repeat itself when it comes to history.
It's so interesting that this movie came out right at the tail end of the Cold War. There was this whole like line of thinking of the end of history, like the end of conflict as we understood it previously. And so large geopolitical bodies weren't going to change the way. And clearly that was all wrong. The story of human history has been like different imperial powers sort of like amassing their abilities and then going to war. And then, what's the fallout of that? And with this thought of like, okay, well, if the Soviet Union's gone and like, we're just going to let markets go and everything's like kind of just like going to be chill. We get the 90s perspective of like, yeah, no, now we've got to deal with like the natural shit. We have to deal with like recycling and
more ecological concerns. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's no longer a story of human history. It's now humanity dealing with the threats of nature. And that's all bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
But then we get the restructuring where for a while, post 9/11, we get the big focus of like, well, there's terrorist cells and there's like dissidents through the world. And we really start to look at a lot of political interactions as policing efforts, which has already been the case during the containment period of the Cold War. And now in human history, we're getting back to the point where we're starting to see big nation states like butting heads with each other again in ways that could be like world ending. So like this movie came out at the end of what was sort of like a big hurrah for that kind of political tension. And then it kind of like was shuffled around for a little bit. Now we're kind of getting back to that point.
It kind of makes me think of the movies that came out after World War I or even after World War II, where it's like the war to end wars. And now we'll bring you kind of the more happy-go-lucky, hopeful movies. We'll never repeat each other again. Wrong. So there was that. But yeah, it is kind of reminiscent, I think, of what we'd seen in cinema previously as well.
The movie is interesting. I'm glad I finally watched it. I guess this is what I'm getting at. I'm glad I finally watched this movie. There's a lot of things that I like in it They do not outweigh the bad. But it's close enough that I'm very surprised, pleasantly.
Do you think it's the worst of the four, Case?
That's a good question. I have seen a line of thinking, 4 had always been like listed as the bad one. There's been a lot of people sort of going back and forth between 3 and 4 now in a way that they hadn't before. 3 is a more complete movie, but 3 is not taking a big swing. 4 is taking a bigger swing, and it fails worse, but it's more impressive in that it takes that big swing. So I think between the two of them, I don't know. I think 3 is like the one that you can have a person watch and it's still a movie. This one barely finished just because of all the production issues. So I think I would say this is worse than 3 from the perspective of like, can anyone just like watch it? It's hard not to be taken out by so much of the jankiness of this movie. Also, while there's nice hopeful moments in this, there's nothing that is going to stick in children's nightmares the way the woman being turned into a robot in Superman 3 happens. All of us, and by all of us, I mean all millennials, are scarred in severe ways. Like I constantly hear on just random podcasts when they bring up Superman, they'll be like, yeah, I haven't fucked with Superman since I saw Superman 3 when I was way too young. And I'm like, yep, that goes for every goddamn person. Like, I think our email exchange with Adam Lance Garcia when we brought him on for Superman 3 was like, yeah, did you have this from nightmares? Oh my God, I did too. Oh my God, I did too. And it was just like us all being like, oh yeah, I was traumatized by that movie. And that is impressive in a way that this movie doesn't ever create anywhere near the level of emotional response. I don't know. J-Mike, how about you? Where do you rank?
Oh, God.
Let's just say, well, you know what? Let's do it. Let's rank the 6 proper Superman movies, counting Returns and Man of Steel.
God. 1 and 2.
And I'll say that 2, you can have both Lester and Donner cut together as like a complete work.
Okay, well, so 1 and 2. Returns 3, Man of Steel 4.
Really? Okay.
Mainly because I agreed with you when we watched Superman 3 with, was it the restaurant scene where he's like half drunk and he's like drinking the coffee?
Yeah, where he's been poisoned by it all and he's just like sitting at the bar doing shots.
Yeah, it makes me laugh every time I see it. So it was like, why would they have... Okay, cool. This is the theme of the movie. We're just going to go with it here.
Yeah. It's definitely the best GIF that you can make from any Superman thing ever. Like him at the bar doing shots. I see that online every now and then, and I'm like, I'm happy that that's from that movie.
I'm too old for this shit type thing.
Nick, I'm curious for you.
Okay, well, I'm actually going to say, yes, Superman 1, 2, Man of Steel, Superman Returns, 3, and Quest for Peace.
Yeah, that's actually the exact same for me. Well, I've said this plenty of times before. I think Man of Steel has enough strengths going for it, just by virtue of the fact that it's like, oh, look at the technology we have for showing some of these like big fight sequences, that it's an impressive piece, that Cavill's a really good Superman casting, that there's a lot of good stuff going for it. I think it's neck and neck between it and Returns, but Returns has all the creepy shit that is the problem with the Donner era Superman stuff. And like, oh my God, Superman 4, like that scene with Lois fucked me up way worse than I expected.
And also, Man of Steel has a great soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, which doesn't hurt.
Yeah. So again, I would have Returns and Man of Steel very close together and could easily flip between the two. It could be like a Pluto Neptune situation there. I put those two there. 1 and 2 are better. And then like 3, for all its faults, it is memorable. It is very memorable. And then 4, also for all its faults, is very memorable, but in different ways. It's got a lot of heart. It also has a serial rapist in Superman, and I don't know if I can ever like really forgive this movie for that. But yeah, but man, oh God, it's so weird. It's so weird. I'm like I said, I'm glad I saw it, but like I'd always heard it was the bad one, and I never knew how bad some of the things were going to be. But I do like that I saw it. I do like it's such like weird feelings right now.
I did want to kind of ask, speaking of which, you guys up to date with Superman and Lois, the TV show?
Yes.
I wonder whether the fight on the moon might be
thought about that.
a homage to this movie. There it's Superman and Doomsday, but still, I wonder whether it might be homage to this movie.
I was thinking about that when they got to that fight there. It very well might be. Superman and Lois has had a love of doing nods to other Superman stuff. Like the pilot is almost Superman 3's plot.
Yes.
Like, especially with the like I'm going to freeze the lake and we're going to deal with like this like nuclear plant that's like melting down kind of stuff. Like all that stuff is like really well done. And I'm like surprised at how good they made it. So I could see them having intentional nods there. Just Superman and Lois is so good.
It's been so consistently good. Insane. Yeah. Loving Superman and Lois.
We need to do a roundup talking about it because we talked a lot about season 1 and then we actually haven't talked about season 2 or 3 on the show. But I've been following it. I like the show a lot. I'm sad that they are coming back with such a reduced budget for season 4. I'm really glad that they are getting a season 4 to wrap up all the big story parts.
Agreed.
They clearly love the material. And like My Adventures with Superman, also really good Superman stuff that is kind of playing with some of the ideas that we talk about here, where like Clark Kent would be charming and people would like him. And like that all kind of makes sense. It's the same thing I've been talking about with Star Trek stuff right now. We are at a moment where the media that is coming out is really good for the stuff that we're getting. So it is hard for me to be mad about works that kind of derailed it earlier on. This movie killed the Superman franchise for 20 years. This movie put a lot of bad feelings out there in the world about comic book movies in general. Like the 90s were not nice to like comic book fans.
Well, the same argument could be made for Batman and Robin with the Batman franchise.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
Bat nipples.
And you know, like Batman comes in 1989. This is 1987. So it's like pretty quick. We get good comic book movies coming out, but there were a lot of people who were very upset about this movie because of what it did to Superman in pop culture. But now looking back in 2023, and we've got 2 great Superman shows that are on the air right now. We've got James Gunn working on a new Superman thing. We had interesting and weird Snyder Superman stuff already. Same situation. Like I could be more mad about it if that was the end, but it's a property that keeps going and keeps on having permutations and new swings. And some of them are strikeouts. Some of them are foul balls. I don't even know what to describe with this one. I don't know the best baseball metaphor here.
But I will say also, even as bad as it was, one of the highlights of the Flash movie is actually the Superman stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible, terrible movie. But but the Superman stuff, I mean, once again, if you guys have seen it, yes?
I have.
It just came out for streaming, so I'm watching it this weekend.
Okay, so all I'm gonna say is the Superman stuff they put in, it has potential. It has legs, as they say.
Yeah. I've heard enough that I'm not worried too much about being spoiled here, like, you know, the world. But yeah, like that's my point. That like we are getting good Superman material in general. We've had great animated series since then. We've had so many like solid works out there, and we're going to keep getting it. And clearly there is attention being paid on this franchise to do it right at some point. Like it hasn't stopped Superman, but I could understand if in 1993 you thought that 6 years earlier the Superman franchise had been killed because of this movie, being really upset.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel that way now. And it's the same when I look at like Star Trek stuff, talking about like the J.J. Abrams movies, where like, yeah, Into Darkness really upset me when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
But now I've got Strange New Worlds. Now I've got Lower Decks. Like there's really good stuff out there. Time has a way of healing a lot of wounds. And this movie has things to appreciate when you go back to look at it. So like I said, I'm very glad to have seen it. Nick, thank you for coming on to talk about it. I know we've been talking about this for a while, and we had all of our like 100th episode kind of stuff that interfered with that, and then also doing all the coverage because of the anniversary of the Doomsday Superman fight that is this year. So we spent like 10 episodes talking about Death of Superman stuff.
Maybe.
So it's been a while since we first discussed it, and I'm glad that we finally got to that point. And I'm glad I finally saw it. I do hope that someone, please, for the love of God, if the 45-minute longer cut exists out there in the world, please send me a link. The link can include a PayPal, you know, little grease on that one.
Hashtag release the Fury cut.
Yes, there we go.
No more hashtags, please.
J-Mike, do you have any closing thoughts about Superman 4?
I'll never forgive you. No,
this is not the worst thing I've ever done to you.
No, it had great ideas, fun moments. But it was a movie. It definitely was a movie that happened. And we learned some lessons from it, Case. Lessons have been learned. Hopefully we never repeat those ever again. No more references to Nuclear Man. No more villains with sharp nails.
Well, if they're going to be sharp nails, have them be like a cutter kind of character. Like,
right. I mean, we will get Sabretooth later on. Those nails were horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look pretty bad.
Yeah.
Nails are hard to make look good on
We
human
didn't need
fingers.
nails, man. We didn't need nails. He had energy powers already.
Yeah.
And telekinesis and a lot of other things. This was a movie. This was a movie that I learned from. And I'll never watch it again.
Nick, how about you?
I think I've kind of torn it to shreds enough. I think it's like kicking a puppy at this point. So I really kind of don't want to say any more because I really already have done the damage. But I mean, maybe I'll revisit it in the future if I'm either particularly high or particularly drunk and, and have some mates over and we're like, what do you want to watch? That's what Superman for.
Actually, I think a drinking game to this movie could be a lot of fun.
You'll be dead. You'll end up dead in the hospital.
I may have watched this movie in an altered state, which might be why I'm like, there are plenty of things that I'm like, oh yeah, that was fucking cool, man.
I mean, I equate it to The Crow Wicked Prayer, which if you have had a few too many, it actually is a really good movie. And this is kind of the same thing. So yeah, if I have some buddies over and we want to watch something like really wacky, well, I'll stick it on. But personally, I don't know if I'm going to revisit it either. I mean, it's kind of like that bad chocolate you get in the box when you order the, your Blu-rays. Of course, it has to be in there. It's like when I ordered my Jurassic Park box set. Of course, 3 is in there. So what can you do? But yeah, it's that kind of deal.
Yeah. I'm going to throw this out there as drinking game rules. Every time we get the stock shot of Superman flying, take a shot.
There you go.
I think that's a really good starting point for whatever rules are going to put in there.
Someone's gonna
Probably
end up
every
in the
time you get
hospital.
fingernails from the nuclear man, that's a good spot for it. Then every time Superman does like what is a crime, that should be a drink. And I think you've got a pretty good set of rules right there.
Nice.
And the question is, does throwing Lois off the building count as one crime and then erasing her memory count as a second one? Or is that all part of one particular crime? And I think it depends on like how likely you are to survive the remainder of the movie at that point.
Likely.
So I am very glad that we talked about this one. Nick, give your plugs, because the last time you and I talked, I was on your show talking about the League of Super Pets. And before that, we were on talking about the Spider-Man pilot from the 70s series. But tell people about your show and where they can find you and what you've got going on.
Well, first off, thank you both so much for being so gracious and so kind to have me on. I had a blast. And of course, I look forward to having you guys back on Happiness and Darkness sooner rather than later. That said, folks, so you can find me at my day job, where I am the host of the Whiskey and Cigarettes radio show, where we play today's country, traditional country, and everything else in between. More info about that, you can visit our website, which is whiskeyandcigarettesshow.com. Podcast-wise, as mentioned, myself and Keith Bliss can be found hosting Happiness and Darkness, the superhero movie podcast, where we discuss all superhero movies under the sun. Coming up, we'll be reviewing The Invincible Iron Man, the animated movie. First time I've seen it, and I have thoughts. And of course, myself, Rachel Friend, and Zan Sprouse can be found on Gold Standard, the Oscars podcast. We're reviewing all the Best Picture winners in chronological order. We recently reviewed Slumdog Millionaire. In a couple of weeks, we'll be reviewing The Hurt Locker. So looking forward to that. And last, but certainly not least, if you're fans of those superhero TV shows, myself and Charles Skaggs can be found on the Fandom Zone podcast, where we're currently reviewing Secret Invasion.
Nice. As with, it seems most podcaster, you have found a way to just be busy, which
Indeed.
I am proud that we all have this like same pathological desire, just like put out content, hashtag content, baby. But you have great content, and I think
Thank
people
you,
should check out all of those. I am so glad that we connected back in the day, and I'm happy to have you on finally. So if listeners, after they go check out all of Nick's stuff, they should check out what we've got going on at certainpov.com. There are a ton of great shows. Fuck it, I'm going to give a shout out to Jukebox Vertigo. They're currently on hiatus at the moment, but it is a great show where on each episode, Keith and Josue and a bunch of awesome people build out a playlist that they've been building out on Spotify since the show started. And they do listening parties after each episode where they play Mario Kart and talk about the music and just vibe on Twitch. So that's a really good time there. I love joining those chats when it happens. I hope they get back to it soon, but I know Josue's got some stuff going on, so totally understand, but they have a great back catalog, so definitely recommend checking that one out. We've got tons of great shows at certainpov.com, and if you enjoy interacting with any of us, you can check out our Discord server. You can find a link on certainpov.com. It's going to be in the show notes for this episode. It's going to be all over. Come interact. It's a really fun server. We've got a lot of great people talking about comics and video games, TTRPG stuff, music. There's a Song of the Day channel that we started when Jukebox joined, which has been great for us, just being like, yeah, this song's stuck in my head right now, or this song's like what I'm just kind of in the mood for. And then just like lots of people like chiming in, being like, oh yeah, that is a really good track. Or like, oh man, that shit's my jam, which is always just like kind of fun to do without it being like so overwhelming like some servers can be. So check out all of that. Check out our YouTube channel where you can find clips of this show as well as a bunch of our other shows, as well as our Superman analog series that I've been putting out. Now, as I've alluded to a couple of times in this episode, I recently had a baby, and so my production rate is bad right now. I used to be able to keep it up on a weekly basis, and that is not happening at the moment, but they are happening as I am getting them done. So check those out. The series is still going. We've had some really cool ones. I recently talked about Stupendous Man, which was Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes' secret identity, alter ego fantasy, which was a really fun video to do because it meant I was rereading a bunch of Calvin and Hobbes. So that's always fun. Check out that video. Also did Irredeemable, the Plutonian. That was a really good one. And coming up, we've got some stuff on some prose pieces that are going to be interesting for me to figure out how the hell I am doing a video for those. So maybe by the time this episode drops, that video will come out and you'll be able to answer that question for me. But right now, it's a mystery. You can find me on Twitter at Case Aiken. On most other social media, you can find me at Case Aiken. You can find me on Instagram at Quetzalcoatl5 because I'm holding on to that AIM screen name for dear life. But I don't know. We don't know where the party's going to be.
Am I still on Twitter? I have no idea. I only responded because you tagged me in that case.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. Whatever the hell site that we have all decided to go to it by the time this episode drops, you can find us. You just look us up. We're not hard to find. But we'll be back soon with another episode. But until then, stay super, man.
Men of Steel is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Jmike Folsom and Case Aiken. The show is scored and edited by Geoff Moonen. And our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.